You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 590, The Void.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Norman Lau. Each week on Mission Log, at times we can get sucked into an episode so completely that we can barely see the stars from the morals, meanings, and messages contained therein. And after we see Starlight again, we ask ourselves, does this episode stand the test of time?
This week, The Void, the one where Voyager is pulled into a nearly inescapable darkness where the only things you can trust are your allies, your principles, and Seven's ability to out-chef Neelix.
Ouch. Chef.
Yeah, serious. Ooh. I'll be right back with trivia, but first, Norman is here to tell you how to reach us.
We would love to hear from you. Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Find us on Facebook at Mission Log Pod and on Instagram and Threads at Roddenberry Podcasts. The conversation always continues in the Mission Log Discord with near-daily live events and 24/7 chat about the topics you love. Get your invitation to our private server by joining patreon.com/missionlog. While you're at it, one of the most important ways to help your favorite podcasts is to leave a 5-star rating and a review at Apple or your preferred podcast platform. And remember, your comments could be used on the show. And now here's John Champion with this week's trivia.
All right, let's talk about The Void. We have a story by Raph Green and Kenneth Biller. And Raph was a staff writer, but his name appears here along with Ken. And it's his next to last episode where he gets a screen credit. Now, most recently, we covered Prophecy, where he also shared a credit with Ken, along with friends of the show, Larry and Janet Nemechek. And when it came time for the teleplay, Raph Green shares the credit, again here, with James Caan, who we also discussed recently with his work on Lineage. And similar to Ken Biller, who had worked his way up from staff writer to executive producer, James had been promoted to supervising producer in Voyager's 7th season. This was directed by Mike Vehar. Most recently, we discussed Mike's direction in Repentance, and he has got 2 more episodes in Season 7 before we catch up with him again on Enterprise. Got a lot of guest stars, a lot of people hanging out in The Void, but we're going to focus in on a handful. Let's see, the first personal encounter in The Void is with General Valen, played by Robin Sachs. Robin definitely should be recognizable to you. He has genre cred, as it were. He was Ethan on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He appeared in multiple Babylon 5 episodes. He's in The Lost World Jurassic Park. And even though he hasn't been in another episode of Star Trek, he was General Saris in Galaxy Quest, and that's about as close as you can get to being in Trek without actually being in Trek. He was close, though, to being in Star Trek before because Robin actually auditioned for the role of Benjamin Sisko on DS9. So there is a parallel universe where that happened. Now, first to form an alliance with Voyager is Garon, played by Scott Lawrence. Scott has worked all over the industry since the mid-'80s when he made his TV debut in an episode of Murder, She Wrote. The TV guest credits came nonstop, and Scott's feature film credits include Cloverfield, Avatar, and yes, a Star Trek film that would be Into Darkness. But Scott also dabbles in the dark side, and he has been the voice of Darth Vader in multiple Star Wars video games. Lokar is one of the overlookers from the hierarchy, that species that we met back in Tinker, Tenor, Dr. Spy. Here he is played by Paul Wilson, and without all that alien makeup prosthetic, he is very recognizable as Bob from Office Space. He also had long recurring roles on It's Gary Shandling's show and as Paul on Cheers. He appeared on The X-Files, and you can even catch him as Winston Churchill in FDR, American Badass. And incidentally, the other hierarchy alien in the scenes with Paul wasn't credited for this episode, as are most of the other aliens. Bossal is played by Michael Seamus Wiles, and audiences might know Michael from recent performances in Breaking Bad and Sons of Anarchy, but go back a few more years and you will see him in features like Fight Club and Lost Highway. He had a short recurring role as the black-haired man in The X-Files, and while he also doesn't have another Trek credit in his resume, he was very close friends with Lawrence Tierney, who was the first holodeck heavy we met as Cyrus Redblock, so there's a worthy Trek connection. Incidentally, Tierney was cast in Reservoir Dogs, a movie that Michael also auditioned for, but he didn't land that role as Mr. Blonde. Finally, welcome back to a TNG guest star and fan favorite, Jonathan Del Arco, who of course played Hugh in Iborg and here portrays the mute, void-native alien dubbed Fantome. And this is not the last time Jonathan appears in Star Trek. We'll have to wait a little more than 20 years, but we'll get there.
Welcome to the Delta Quadrant. Any attempts we have made to convince Voyager to avoid the void have been rendered null and void.
Prologue. At a formal dinner aboard Voyager, 7 of 9 astonishes the crew with an elaborate gourmet menu, each course paired with a carefully selected wine, a lesson Chakotay quickly learns when she firmly discourages substitutions. Janeway praises her expertise, B'Elanna marvels at the progression of dishes, and even Neelix concedes defeat to her culinary skill. But her meticulous precision clashes with Tom's casual request for salt, earning him a pointed suggestion that he might prefer a peanut butter and jelly sandwich instead. Before the moment can escalate, a violent jolt rocks the ship. Janeway hurries to the bridge where Tuvok reports Voyager is being dragged off course by a mysterious graviton surge. Harry attempts to counter with thrusters and by reversing the shield polarity, but the efforts fail. The ship is pulled helplessly into the heart of a raging storm, lurching so violently that crew members are thrown to the floor across the vessel. As Neelix and another officer regain their footing, they gaze into a starless void, just as an unknown alien vessel opens fire. Act 1. Voyager is attacked by a heavily armed ship bearing Vaudouar signatures and stolen technology. The second vessel intervenes but quickly turns its weapons on Voyager, raiding critical supplies, 90% of the ship's food, 3 full tanks of deuterium and more, before fleeing. Moments after the raiders vanish beyond weapons range, another seemingly hostile ship approaches. Instead of firing, it hails. General Valen, a veteran of the region, contacts Janeway and accepts her invitation aboard under a fragile truce. He explains the brutal rules of the Void. Funnels drag ships inside, but none ever escape. Survival depends solely on seizing resources from others. Valen urges Janeway to abandon principle and join the predatory cycle. When he offers tactical data in exchange for torpedoes, she refuses, unwilling to trade weapons for plunder. The situation soon worsens. B'Elanna reports graviton forces draining the warp core at 10 times the normal rate, leaving less than 2 weeks of deuterium. 7 proposes adapting Borg sensors to predict funnel eruptions, timing one precisely to propel the ship back to normal space. Tuvok recommends reinforcing shields, though the maneuver would require warp 8.2 at the exact instance. Knowing the risks, Janeway orders the attempt. Voyager enters the next funnel only to be hurled back. B'Elanna reports that the warp core is now offline. Act 2. With Voyager's warp core offline and deuterium nearly depleted, Janeway faces grim choices. B'Elanna estimates their reserves will last only a week, even with strict cutbacks. Neelix offers to scavenge nearby derelicts, but Janeway refuses to risk the crew. 7 proposes using shuttle warp cores to supplement power, though Chakotay reminds her it would still require deuterium. Determined, Janeway declares they are not yet easy prey for the Void's raiding parties and vows to track down the thieves who stole their supplies. Soon after, Tuvok's sensors locate the vessel, adrift, its crew slaughtered, its hull stripped bare. Yet one ship's wreckage becomes another's fortune. 7 identifies a tricesium casing that can be converted into power. It is beamed aboard, along with a wounded, nonverbal stowaway who has survived by conserving oxygen. Janeway orders he has to be cared for until his people can be found. When scans confirm Valen holds their stolen cargo, Janeway demands its return. He refuses, insisting theft is the only law of the void. Janeway opens fire, reclaims what is theirs, but firmly rejects Tom's suggestion to seize more. Later, in her ready room, Chakotay and Tuvok warn that survival may require compromise. However, Janeway stands fast to the Federation Charter and its principles, proposing instead an alliance, sharing food, medicine, and defense with any ship willing to reject piracy. Act 3. Janeway's attempts to forge an alliance in the void proves difficult. Many ships reject cooperation, choosing raids over trust. She appeals to Garen and his people, her first potential allies, urging him to protect new arrivals rather than exploit them. But he dismisses her vision as naive. Still, Janeway insists survival must rest on shared principles, not predation. Even offers a parting gift as an olive branch to demonstrate her sincerity in building a coalition. Meanwhile, Seven discovers her phase compensator missing, only to learn Janeway gave it to the Nigerians as a gesture of goodwill. Seven questions the logic, but Janeway argues that generosity may be the only way to earn allies. In sickbay, the Doctor and Seven begin communicating with their silent stowaway, whom the Doctor names Fantome, uncovering both intelligence and a unique physiology. Determined to preserve morale, Neelix prepares a modest romantic dinner for Tom and B'Elanna, though the moment is cut short when Voyager races to defend a newly arrived ship under attack by Valen. Outgunned and losing shields, Voyager is nearly overwhelmed until Garen unexpectedly intervenes, turning his weapons on Valen and forcing both raiders to retreat. With suspicion lingering, Janeway demands his intentions. Garen declares his support, giving Voyager its first true ally in the void. Act 4. With Garen and Lakar secured in the Alliance, Janeway turns to her next prospect, the Nigerian commander Basal, whose ship carries technology that might help Voyager escape the void. Over dinner, he mocks her ideals but shows interest when she offers to relocate Fantome's species from his vessel using Voyager's advanced sensors. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Seven refine Fantome's musical language, revealing both his people's intelligence and a possible origin within the void itself. Their presence stirs curiosity among the crew, but also tension as Basal derides them as vermin, while others embrace them as allies. In engineering, efforts to design a shield strong enough to protect the Coalition fleet stall, lacking only a Polaron modulator. When Janeway suggests an ally might provide one, Tuvok enters Astrometrics and discovers Lokar secretly monitoring engineering, using surveillance technology that could aid the Alliance. Soon after, Basal produces the missing modulator, claiming he traded for it. Suspicious, Janeway presses him until he admits he killed a Kinjal crew to acquire the device. Though Garen argues its use could secure their escape, Janeway refuses. The Alliance, she insists, cannot be built on theft and murder. Basal is expelled, and Janeway's fragile vision of cooperation endures, unbroken even in the void. Act 5. Janeway reflects on the cost of admitting Basal, regretting that her gamble for his technology fractured the Alliance. Chakotay reassures her, though she knows her instincts were right from the beginning. Soon after, Tuvok employs Lokar's surveillance system and uncovers Basal's plot with Valen to attack Voyager within 48 hours. Pressed for time, Janeway drives B'Elanna to finish the Polaron modulator and orders preparation for escape. Meanwhile, the Doctor confirms Fantome's people wish to remain in the void but offer their aid. As Basal's fleet opens fire, Voyager's fragile coalition rallies. At Janeway's signal, the Doctor beams Fantome's people aboard the enemy vessels, where they disable power from within. With seconds to spare before the graviton surge, B'Elanna activates the experimental shield, encasing Voyager and her allies as they plunge into the funnel. The strain is immense, but together they burst free of the anomaly and the void into open space. In the aftermath, Voyager parts ways with her allies on good terms. Though their paths diverge, Janeway savors the fleeting sense of belonging to something larger than her crew. The Federation may still be 30,000 light-years away, but for a moment, it feels close at hand. The end.
Very nicely done reference there, Norman, to the Polaron modulator.
Yes, Polaron modulator.
Look, did they have that in there? All right, look, they start strong with the food. And you got the quail in truffle sauce, served vol au vent style with the little puff pastry. I love that because, look, and I let you in on a little secret. It's actually not that hard to do, but it's very impressive.
Well, don't tell Neelix that.
I know, right? But I love that kind of thing. I love the detail here. And yes, 7 of 9 is the worst kind of chef and host. I mean, yes, she is technically gifted, but yikes, I do not want to be there. By the way, side note, kind of pleasantly ironic that in real life, Jerry is married to Christoph M., world-renowned chef. So they both really know their stuff about food. And by the way, side note for Chakotay, don't get intimidated by 7. Drink whatever you like.
See, you really should. I'm going to be the elitist jerk here because
okay, go ahead.
100 billion% agree with 7. When you prepare a dish, and you prepare the way that the dish is supposed to be appreciated for all of the senses, and is paired with a very specific beverage, there's a reason for that.
I agree. Look, I just did a wine tasting last week, and absolutely the food was enhanced by the wine and vice versa. They are designed to go together in specific pairings. But look, if you're the customer and you say, I really want more of the Chardonnay, all right, it's your meal, it's your taste buds. We'll silently judge you later.
That's right. Mutter underneath our breath.
Right.
It's kind of like that was like 7's response to Tom with the salt about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and stuff.
Right.
But here's the thing. That's like the doctor's sarcasm. And this is a note that I actually wrote to Shar, and she said, did the doctor in any way impart that sarcasm when they were fused in body and soul?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, 7 has humor, but this is that is a very sarcasm. Doctor line. Yeah. You're right.
I mean, there's that, and like all the time that they spend together, it probably rubs off on her too. But when he was inside her brain.
Yes. Totally different situation. I like that idea. Nice little retcon there. All right. We see so many shots in Star Trek of, the bridge exploding and there's sparks flying all over and rocks falling out of the season. I love the destruction that we see in the mess hall. The table flips, the stuff falls off, and then if you look behind on that bar where Neelix is always, a bowl of stuff gets knocked over and the apples and things fall over whoever that background player is. That was so well done.
Totally.
Because that is not an area, unlike the bridge, that is rigged for explosives. So you've got to very carefully plan how you're going to do that and time it out. Really well done.
This might be my second ship getting tossed around scene. My first, I think it's one of the most epic kind of like canted angle shots that just launches crew members across the screen. It was in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when Reliance hits, the bridge, in the first attack scene. It's just all of a sudden these people just fly across the screen.
Right.
Who exactly, though, is the crewman in the dining hall that Neelix is working with? Is he some kind of footman, yeoman? Who is that?
He might be. He's the guy who rolls out the puff pastry.
He does. I mean, it's almost kind of like he would ignite the flambe on like your Bake Alaska or something like that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
You need that extra hand to do that. Yeah.
Evasive pattern beta 6. Now, I know Janeway knows what that means, and of course her crew knows what that means, but it would be really neat to see it actually play out on screen.
Right. Yeah. We do get some interesting movements here, but it usually just amounts to turn left.
Right.
That's, no. Alpha was turn right.
Beta is
turn left. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I love that we hear this line, Valence, my scans show you have photon torpedoes. Like, how? Because they should have -30 at this point.
I see you have shuttlecraft. Really?
I see you used to have photon torpedoes.
Right. I'm going to make this one gripe about this, and I'll shut up.
Yeah.
General Valen.
Yeah.
So I love Robin Sachs, and anyone who has watched enough science fiction in the 1990s knows, like, pretty much whatever you cover him in or not, it's Robin Sachs. But the name Valen for me is associated with Babylon 5 as probably one of the most pinnacle characters in the story. And just hearing him kind of like his name being mentioned in this, it was very grating, Quint scraping a chalkboard grating, in Jaws. But I did like the makeup, and there was something Gul Dukat-ish about him.
Yes. Yeah. That sort of reptilian flesh makeup, it was a bit Dukat-ish.
And the elitism that Robin Sachs gives a character.
Yeah.
It very Dukat-ish.
They would probably get along, he and Gul Dukat. Yeah. I like this shot of the warp core powered down. I mean, it's pretty easy on set. You just unplug it, but it's not a shot that you see very often. Then I wondered, how long does it take to boot up a cold warp core? When it's totally offline, what is containing what needs to be contained? He's got antimatter, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think about, back in the day, 100 years ago, it took a full day to warm up the boilers in a steamship. So is this a thing you can flip back on, or do you have to wait? Like, no, we gotta capture all that antimatter again, stick it back in the tube.
If I may, as I shut up my glasses,
okay, please.
We do have a similar scenario in The Naked Time in the original series, where, because Spock, underneath the influence of the polywater molecule.
Oh man, you're good.
No,
yeah,
that's what caffeine does. So he's struggling to control his emotions and try and come up with a formula. And Kirk is slapping around saying, "We need a formula," right? And Scotty says, I cannot change the laws of physics. I've got to have 30 minutes.
Yes.
Right?
That's it.
Now, of course, that's 23rd century technology versus 24th century technology, but
sure, they
give a frame of reference off at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I love that.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
Seeing that B'Elanna is further along in her pregnancy, whatever happened to that really cool engineer smock that she had?
Oh, yeah.
It had like the little tool pockets on it.
Right.
Back
when Roxanne was actually pregnant. Yeah. Oh, that would have been great.
Yeah. And also, I'm a big fan of 1980s like wireframe graphics. And I love the wireframe graphics of kind of like the graviton surge pools that's a good name. Graviton surge pools.
Oh my God, that's good.
All right. Somebody write that down.
Yeah.
That Seven had in her animatics trying to escape the void. I like those.
Yeah, that was cool stuff. Overall, I like the look and feel of this episode. But as we come into Act 2 and we have this scene, several scenes, but one in the meeting room there, it's so dark and quiet. And I love that. It is reminiscent of the episode Night, yes, sure. But we're going a different angle here, at least in this one. Although I think there would be a little bit of sound since they have to have life support on, like how much energy can a few lights and an air conditioner use? I don't know.
None more energy?
None more energy. That is the correct answer. Good thing, by the way, that the Doctor has his own power source. Got to keep him booted up. So however he's getting the photon surge, he's got to have that going. Good thing the transporters are still working. I thought those used up a huge amount of power, but I guess if you need to get food to and from, the ships that are stealing it, then you better power on the transporters as well.
I wonder if that's kind of like a given now. Like if there's an energy issue, like with the ship and it goes into auxiliary power, then the holodeck needs to work, or it has its own power source that we've seen.
Right.
And certain, obviously, emergency functions, like maybe minimal ships. Obviously, the deflector dish has to be online, or else space debris will just puncture the hull. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Maybe it's like a symptom of watching so much Voyager. We're getting into so much technobabble in our discussions, right?
That's what the episode has become.
I love seeing Janeway's screen in a ready room. Around 17 minutes, 12 seconds, you can actually see the charter of the Federation, the United Federation of Planets.
Yes.
And I like that she already has, I think, the answer to Chakotay's and Tuvok's arrival into her ready room.
It's a nice moment, and it just leads us right into it because Tuvok says, logic suggests we may have to become more opportunistic. That's such that word's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
A lot.
Yeah, more opportunistic if we intend to survive. Okay, so Tuvok, right here in Act 2, he's just setting us up, and we'll put a pin in that, and we're going to come back to it because that is the heart of the matter that we'll discuss in the next segment.
But I also like it when the writers write Chakotay as like the voice of the crew, because he asks a very specific, but I think relevant question, like, is everyone on board willing to make the same sacrifice for principles as you are?
Yeah.
Right. And it's a really interesting part of the discussion because we all believe that everyone on board believes in the principles.
Yeah.
But do they?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and at this point, it's early in the process, so Janeway can very flippantly say, like, we may lose a little weight, but we won't lose who we are. Yeah. She's saying that on a full stomach.
I mean, it kind of makes sense when you look at it from Equinox Parts 1 and 2's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's almost something that captain, he had to deal with.
Yeah.
At the end of this act, though, I really love how they frame that particular quote that Janeway had to end the scene, because you had Chakotay on one side in the foreground, Tuvok on the other side in the foreground, and Janeway in the middle. What is that, John? That is the triumvirate.
It is. It's perfect.
Right?
Yeah. Well done. Yeah. Ethos, pathos, logos. Right there. Right in front of us. I love this as she's trying to negotiate and build her alliance. And is it Galen? I'm going to get his name wrong here. Garen, yeah. Is it? So if they refuse, then we raid them?
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, okay, we got a learning curve here. That's perfect. But I have to hand it to Janeway. Like, she got these people to the table in the first place. They were probably shooting, and then it was like, no, come over and we'll talk. So that's a scene missing, but it happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an assumption that when Voyager came on the scene in the Void, they're like, wow, who's this? They're big. They have some pretty good defenses. All right. Might be a good idea to hear them out. Maybe, because they were able to push back a certain, like Balin and stuff like that. So that could be, the scene missing. I love Neelix speaking up about his experience on behalf of Voyager. Like, I was a trash scavenger. Yeah. Barge and
a free agent.
Yeah. A man of meat. Well, his ass. But it's like, look at what they did for me. What they did for me, they can do for you.
Yeah.
It was a legitimate plea on his part.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Like that. And we learned from Janeway that if you want to burn Seven, you tell her she's not efficient.
Straight up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this is where like Jerry, I think, is just, again, she shines in the nuances when Seven looks at kind of almost like at the camera breaking the fourth wall, and she has that little smile like, I got what you are doing. Yeah. I get it. Yeah, I'm on board with that. You're good. Nice moment with naming Fantome. I love it. And I love Seven calling out the Doctor for not picking his own name. Right? I mean, that's great. I did kind of wonder where Neelix got this weird food that he's serving to Tom and B'Elanna. We really don't need that scene because, of course, then duty calls and the food gets wasted. See, that's funny, though. It's like you have this wonderful puff pastry on the quail at the beginning, like you mentioned, right? Now you got like smushed eggs. It looks like something that you would pull out. I was like, wait a second. That doesn't smell bad. I think I could serve this. Right. So you have anything with like eyeballs that taste like chicken and souffles that have collapsed. Yeah, right. That's it. Right. Yes, on the menu tonight. Yeah. I love that new ship that appears in the Void because that, again, we mentioned it in episodes previous, but this also has like a very Flash Gordon style with that kind of bulbous and glassy shape. That was awesome. Warship Ajax. Yes. Yeah. And then, of course, oh my God, these weirdos from the hierarchy, they get pulled into, and I wonder if they know the story from the Doctor, from Tinkerton or Dr. Spy. Like, does this get passed around among the hierarchy, or do they keep it quiet, I thought that the hierarchy aliens looked like a cross between a Centauran and a Pakled. Like if they had Yeah. They're sort of Santarans, but with all the charm of a Pakled. Exactly. So the haberdasheries on those planets must be extraordinary. Huge business. Yeah. Huge business. A lot and a lot of volume. Harry says, Garen's hailing, and Janeway says, get a weapons lock on him. We've been fooled by unexpected allies before. I like that in the writing because it shows Janeway's character building and the expertise. Look. Yeah. We've done this because we've actually criticized that about Janeway. Like, you're going to trust another, like the Vaadwaur, like again. Yeah. Right. And then she's now we're back to cautious optimism. Exactly. Like optimism, but weapons locked. Yeah. They were able to triple their replicator. Weapons locktimism. Well, weapons locktimism. That's good. Yeah. TN restricted. That's mission logs. Exactly.
I love that Neelix says that they were able to triple their replicator efficiency, because then I thought, okay, is this a tech that Voyager will be able to keep and they're going to bring it back to Earth? Because then at this point forward, guess what? Replicators are triply efficient compared to where they were before. That's pretty cool.
I mean, I was hoping, like in the scene with B'Elanna and Garen and Janeway talking about the modulator, that we would see the most important prop in the universe, the greatest.
That would have been the perfect time for it to be drug out of the closet, for sure. Basal, I love this. He gets schooled by Janeway on what an alliance means, and she's perfectly good at negotiating something that helps him out, which is great, i.e. getting all those parasite aliens off his ship. That was a good lesson in diplomacy, really done well. And I love the use of music as a language. Plays beautifully in that scene and further in the episode.
Right. I mean, it's not explicitly or explicitly, is that the right word? Explicitly described or referenced, but is that the Fibonacci sequence, like the mathematical sequence of language?
Could be.
Yeah, because there's something about math and sound and the way that it can be used as language.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. So it seems like a natural way to learn that, So we learned that Basal, of course, killed to get the modulator. B'Elanna seemed perfectly okay with this at first, just keeping it. She has to sort of like learn from Janeway. Oh, right. That's not a good thing to do. Yeah.
It's an interesting equation here. The algebra is really interesting because Basal kills Kajal to get the modulator. And then Janeway says, well, we're going to be accessories to murder if we choose to use it. But are they?
Well,
right?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to get into that in discussion.
I think we'll have to come back and ask ourselves that question. Now, cut to Janeway has now totally learned to be cool with spying on her enemies.
Yeah.
Because remember earlier, Tuvok walks in on the two hierarchy members and he's like, hey, you can't be doing this. But we are, and we've learned something. And now Tuvok has no problem with it either. And Janeway's like, so what have you learned?
Yeah, right. I think like Tuvok was really surprised and somewhat kind of like taken aback. He goes, you broke through my security clearances?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. You're on board. Eavesdropping Tuvok, maybe his best Tuvok. I don't know. That is
he's right up there with judgmental finger Tuvok,
machine gun
Tuvok for sure. Yeah, he's the best Tuvok. Yeah.
So I know this is kind of like a super nerd question, but I'm our audience, you're very good at the theoretical science behind what's going on here. And I'm going to shout out Sam because Sam's kind of like a resident, techno-babblist
genius. Yeah.
Can Voyager's warp bubble exist at the same time as other warp bubbles and vice versa? Or the giant warp bubble that the Polaron modulator creates and helps support, like during when Voyager goes to warp and pulls the other three ships along through the graviton aperture, right?
Yeah.
If Voyager's doing all of that heavy lifting, what are the other ships doing? Are they doing the same heavy lifting, but Voyager's doing the majority of it? And if so, can the bubble exist with other bubbles? Also, if Voyager's shields were getting crushed, were the other smaller ships being crushed as well?
Wow. That's a good question.
I'm putting it out there in the void.
All right. We'll see what happens. And by the way, special recognition to this episode for doing something that most other Star Trek episodes do not do. We get a montage. Let me just point it out. Stuff gets made, computers, they're being looked at, people are nodding at each other and at the screens. There is pointing at those screens. Hell yeah, we got a montage.
Hey, Mission Log listeners. This is a big moment for us, and we want your help shaping what comes next.
That's right. We're launching a Roddenberry Podcast listener survey running now through October 10th, and we want to hear from you about Mission Log, the Trek Files, Genealogy, our YouTube content, social media, Discord, and beyond.
This is your chance to give us honest feedback, help us plan for the future, and maybe even influence how we tackle our next big chapter, Mission Log Enterprise.
And to say thank you, we're giving away something truly special. Limited edition plaques featuring authentic film cells from Star Trek, the original series.
These are actual 35mm frames from the cutting room floor. No two are alike. They're rare, one-of-a-kind Trek artifacts, and we're giving away multiple plaques to lucky winners like you. Maybe you.
So here's how it works. Number 1, complete the survey. The link is in the show notes. 2, you will get a secret code by email. And 3, enter that code on our giveaway page to unlock your entry.
Again, that survey link is right there in the show notes, on your podcast app, on our site, or wherever you're listening now.
We're charting the course for the next phase of Roddenberry Podcasts, and with your input, we will boldly go together.
Only a year or two later, and the native creatures of the void would have been cranking out ringtones. There you have it. Crazy Frog came from the Delta Quadrant. That explains a lot.
So I know that some of the topics that we're going to talk about the void, they're going to be really interesting, and maybe they're going to be a little bit on the heavier side. But I want to start with something light and something that you always bring up when it comes to something that's relative to Star Trek and where we believe like Starfleet usually lands in a best foot forward kind of situation. And this is something that you've coined as starting with empathy. This is the position that we need to start with. And I want to bring up this specific scene where Janeway says about the Phantome and his alien species. Janeway says, "You gave up your rations to our guest in sickbay." Seven says, "He needed food." Janeway says, "You're a valuable member of this crew. Your friend is in sickbay is nothing but a drain on resources. What is efficient about wasting food on him?" So, but now take a look at where Phantome and his race end up at the end. So, because saving Phantome, or Phantome, I should say, and treating his race with kindness and respect reminded me of this line from The Lord of the Rings, when Galadriel said to Frodo, "Even the smallest person can change the course of the future."
Yeah.
And that's who Phantome, I don't know why I get that wrong, but I do. That's what he and his race reminded me of hobbits. Like, Phantome and his people were always underfoot.
Yep.
They were always cast aside.
Yeah.
And now to bring the fullest quote from the Council of Elrond, "At least for a while," said Elrond, "the road must be trod, but it will be very hard, and neither strength nor wisdom will carry us far upon it. This quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong, yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must. The eyes of the great are elsewhere." The small hands equal the smallest person, or in this case, the gremlins that they have been described as, and Phantome, they become like these unlikely allies who ultimately, because of kindness and not coercion, and from, not force or duplicity, they become the allies that Janeway actually needed, because we started with empathy.
I love the way you phrase that. And you can look back at the earlier decisions that Janeway makes in trying to form this alliance, this mini federation, as it were, as being simultaneously self-serving, but also altruistic. And those things can coexist. Like they don't have to be all one or the other. So it is self-serving to want to survive. It is self-serving to want to have more food, have more firepower, have the things that you need, right? But it is also altruistic to want the others around you to survive and thrive and have the other comforts that you have, right? What I love about this encounter with the void aliens, with Phantome and his gang, right, is that the empathy is non-conditional. And there's not a thing at the beginning. There is nothing that Janeway or anybody else knows that they will gain by expressing that empathy. So there is a kind of consideration that's given in the attempt to form an alliance with everybody else. But that attempt is made knowing that, well, you've got technology, we've got technology. You've got food, we've got some food, we had more, but it got stolen, so why don't we all survive together? There is a self-serving element in that. There is nothing self-serving about what they do for Fantôme. And look how it works out for them. Because you may never know when that thing actually serves to benefit you and benefit everybody else, because you reached out that hand of empathy to begin with.
So there was nothing to gain aside from the act in and of itself was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That is Star Trek to me.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, we just went right to the end because that well. Yeah. See you later. Exactly.
On the next mission log.
Right. But there's another point here about how they do it that I thought was a really powerful theme in this episode, and that is the theme of communication. There's cooperation throughout the episode, but the underlying mechanism for the empathy we see on display, for the cooperation that they achieve, the underlying mechanism is communication. You get nothing unless you have communication. So obviously Seven has this breakthrough with Fantôme in order to create an ally through their understanding, right? Fantome's species as a whole learns a new way to communicate, not only with each other, which is really cool to see, but then with the people around them. And you have to wonder, for how many generations did this species exist in there, unable to communicate outside of their presumed telepathy? We don't really know, but now we've opened up a whole new universe for them. And I love that just Janeway right at the start, she's fed up with all the shooting, and she gets every potential adversary to somehow sit down at the table and talk, to communicate about what they need. Now, doesn't always work out, but that's okay. This is worthy of Picard here in the attempt to just figure out, hey, is this going to work out? Are you going to follow the rules? Great, you're welcome to stay. Are you not? We have no use for you. Mm-hmm. See ya.
You know, interesting that you bring up Picard here, because this could have been a Darmok situation, could have been really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
And something that struck me, curious and funny, while Fantôme and his people were learning that language and creating their syntax, I'm surprised that they didn't use a universal translator or the computer to start recording their language so that they could actually start to verbally talk to the aliens. But maybe if there's one thing, and I'll get to it later, if there's one thing that I think could have been fleshed out a little bit more, is this alien story, because it's so fascinating with the points that you're bringing up in terms of how important the communication ended up being.
I mean, there is a version of this where you can kind of fast forward to the presumed chapter 2, and Seven and the Doctor have actually absorbed all of this. They understand the harmonic language, right? So, Voyager's computer, aka the Doctor, now has that information. They could do a whole report on this and say, hey, we encountered this void, and there is this species that's from there, and we actually got to communicate with them.
Right.
Now,
exactly.
Give somebody an extra pip on their collar, because that's not you, Harry, because you didn't do anything.
No, nothing. He failed at reversing the shield polarity.
He did. You had one job.
Deal, right?
You had one job, Harry. Let's talk about some of the ethical conundrums here. I mentioned it in the last segment. Tuvok. Logic suggests we may have to be more opportunistic if we intend to survive. And that sets up that central ethical debate here. Do we compromise our values even when we know that our survival is on the line? Or if we do compromise, how much is enough compromise to survive to see another day? And can we really still call them our values if we've decided just this once that they can be bent? So by the same token, what is to be gained from sticking to the principle if you actually don't live to see another day? Are others better off because of your principled sacrifice?
I'm not sure if like the phrase confirmation bias is applicable here, but
survivor bias.
Well, survivor bias,
Yeah.
but with the confirmation of Janeway sticking to her principles, and then, which is kind of like, brings us back to what we just talked about with Fantome and his race, proving that empathy and generosity and kindness and what Janeway was telling the Seven about, a gift might be able to coerce other people, but they didn't even do that with Fantome's people. It was just being what the Federation stands for and holding on to those principles allowed Fantome and his people to thrive, to become better when they entered the Void, and to help Janeway's alliance out without even being asked to. Those are the principles that Janeway stands for. But at the same time, though, one can't say that it affected the other if she chose to take the Polaron modulator and use it because she rationalized or bent the rules to the point where Basal's like, well, I didn't kill anybody.
Right.
He killed somebody. I was working under the auspices of trusting this alliance at face value, and I can live with that, right? And we're splitting like the thinnest hairs in morality here. Do hardline principles override technicality?
Yeah, well, okay, look, first of all, let's be straight up. Janeway makes the principled decision, but Janeway as a character has compromised herself and her values before. So let's not forget that. But now we have a fresh opportunity for her to not do that. Maybe what's different here is we're catching this at the very beginning of the process. It's not like Year of Hell. It's not like Equinox where, okay, we're all these months into it, and then the compromises take their toll. And those are lessons to be learned. Like, here's how bad it gets when you actually compromise your values.
It's a great point that Valen was saying. I can't stand saying that. The great point, I'm sorry, but I'm not. So Valen says, let's table that for the meantime. We'll see how you feel about your principles when you're starving.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe that's where, again, back to Equinox, maybe that's, where the captain was pushed to, like, I have no other choice but to break my principles. Either that or we die.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess it shows that, okay, you can take the same person and you can present these life or death situations where there is the opportunity to compromise values. And you may live to see the next day with either choice, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a toll to be paid for compromising those values here. I saw a video the other day that was, let's just say it was addressing contemporary political discourse in a little country called the United States, where I happen to live, and you happen to live, as far as I remember. And in this video, they were making an argument that you actually can't keep playing the same game if the other team isn't playing it anymore.
Right.
And that is a choice to compromise one's principles. But as they put it in this video, is okay, if it's soccer and one team decides to keep picking up the ball and running with it and scoring that way over and over and over again, and the other team just keeps waiting for the ball to hit the ground so they can kick it again, that team's going to lose. Yeah. They're not going to live to see another game. They're not going to actually be able to ever play that same game again. So what do you do? How much?
Right, it's a different ball game, as they say.
It is. So how much compromise, how much sacrifice are you comfortable with? Again, I think Janeway has made all the right decisions here. She's done her homework. She's read the Federation Charter, love that moment again. But we're catching her early enough in the process, and maybe having sized up a bit of the situation, we learned that there's over 150 ships visible to them in the Void, and only about 20-something are actually occupied by living beings. So there has been pattern after pattern after pattern of people getting in there and dying or killing each other in the process. Who we haven't met are the people who have gotten out of there, potentially by forming alliances before, or just having the technology to get their way out. But Janeway, she's got some great lines to back up her argument here, and I wrote down a couple of these that I really liked. We'll offer to share our food and medical supplies and defend ships that are attacked by raiders. Okay, this just as a principle, this makes sense. Here's how we do it. She says later on, if we share what we have instead of hoarding it, we might find other people willing to do the same. Socialism. Socialism.
You have something in your throat.
Oh,
it's called
sorry.
conscience.
Sorry. Yeah. That's how it works, gang. I don't know how much more clear this can be. Janeway is on a mission here, not just to get out of the void, but to create this mini federation. And this is how you actually create a society. It's by getting people to share their resources for the common good, that share their skills to benefit everyone. Not just the ones who are at the top of the food chain, but the people like Fantome and his void aliens, because ultimately all will benefit. Man, I love it when Star Trek just sometimes hits you right over the head.
Are we in morals, meanings, and messages?
I feel like we just keep getting there. We just keep getting there. Okay, I want you to go ahead because I want to propose another question to you here before we wrap up this segment. But
I mean, I do have another way of looking at this, and it's just some wonderful provide food for thought.
Good.
I mentioned this earlier in observations about Garen saying refusing the modulator won't bring back the people he killed, and Janeway says no, but using it would make us accessories to murder, and I'm not sure if I agree with that.
I'm glad you brought this up.
Later on, when the Alliance is starting to crack, allies are going into like Valen's pool. Chakotay says, the Jelenians and the Kralor have left with Basal. They felt you were being, and then Janeway says, impulsive and self-righteous. Is that what you think? I watched the scene over again just to find the context in this, because I think that Janeway is asking a rhetorical question. And I think that she's asking it in a way where Chakotay is like, no, you're doing the right thing. You did the right thing. You know you're doing the right thing. And that's not a bad thing. But I'm wondering, is this a way for her to soothe her ego about her decision-making? Because I've mentioned this in the past about the Stoic philosophy of the ego as the enemy. And in this case, Janeway doesn't not just want to escape the void. I mean, that's given, right? That's obviously she wants to escape the void. Obviously, she wants to be able to do it in a way where Voyager isn't like further put at risk. But more than that, she wants to prove that the Federation's values and, you know, its inclusive and collaborative structure, the fruits that alliances can bear, is better than anything that the species that are in there have ever known. She's trying to convince them of that, but is it true? Perhaps. But more so, is it self-serving?
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
so is that ego? Because is she placing her pride over ethics? Is she putting the safety of the crew behind what she believes is soothing her ego? Right?
Would she be reacting the same way? Would she be putting on the same show if it were just her crew around and not a bunch of aliens that she also needed to convince of the value of the Alliance? I asked myself, is it ethical or not to use, well, it's not just stolen technology, but it is technology that was acquired through murder. Now, it was not a sanctioned killing. It was not something that Janeway ordered or anybody else in the Alliance was aware of. But are we back to a situation like the Doctor using Krell Masset's medical knowledge in Nothing Human, when here you have a Cardassian war criminal, a.k.a. a Dr. Joseph Mengele type, but with knowledge that can help save B'Elanna? And do you just say, well, that knowledge came from unethical means, therefore we can't use it, but it'll save somebody? And here we have maybe a more dramatic, maybe more immediate version of that. But what do? Do you take Basal and just say, you know what, we're going to throw you in the brig because you broke the rules, but we're still going to use your technology? I think I kind of have to side with Janeway that there is a moral price to pay for that.
If Janeway brought him into the Alliance as an act of good faith.
Yeah.
And then Basal murdered the Kajal for the device.
Mm.
This doesn't mean that Janeway is in any way responsible or complicit in that murder. Now, she may be naive and trusting to the point where she allowed Basal to join the Alliance, but she did not plan nor conspire to have the Kajal murdered for this device. Right? So I agree with, maybe not as much as Janeway here, but maybe with Garen, like, look, it's been done.
Mm-hmm.
And are we going to basically refuse the opportunity for us to succeed escaping the void? Isn't kind of like that's the whole point. In the Federation, as we know it now, there's Section 31.
Yeah.
And Section 31 has done some nefarious things in the name of the Federation. Will the Federation say, we need to reverse all of that because it violated our principles? But they probably won't, because what Section 31 did allowed the Federation to do certain things in order for them to get to where they are now.
Right.
That's a completely different topic altogether. So I'm just wondering, here's the big question.
Yeah.
Do we see this for the technicality it was? Or is Janeway blinded by her ego and the purity of the Federation values that she's willing to risk the good of the many versus the good of the one?
How many voids are there in this quadrant? We've driven through 2 of them now. Time to get a gas station roadmap. It's way past time for that.
All right, we made it through the void. Norman, you and I formed an alliance to get through this podcast discussing the void. And look, we're almost to the exit point here. But before we go and say goodbye to each other and to our audience today, we're going to look back through the void and we're going to ask ourselves if the episode holds up and if we learned anything along the way. And I think maybe the answer to that is yes, because I think everybody learned a little something along the way.
Yeah.
So Norman, the void, does it hold up?
This is like textbook Star Trek 101, right? And if I had a critique to make, it's as if a little over heavy-handedly so. You know, it's a little preachy. It's a little bonk on the head. But that doesn't necessarily make it bad, because it obviously is going to stand the test of time because it is so textbook Star Trek 101, especially with what happened with Phantome and how these creatures that have been underfoot for so long became so pivotal to the Alliance because generosity allowed them to thrive, right?
Yeah.
That's something that's just, we don't see enough of that. So sometimes you have to remind the audience that Star Trek is the series at its core competency of a moral center that perhaps some people ask, what is Starfleet? And you don't need a documentary to illustrate that. That's an inside joke if you're not keeping from Star Trek. Funny thing, like when I sat down to formulate my notes, I found that I didn't really have a lot to say about the void because it is very meat and potatoes, bread and butter Star Trek. And perhaps it's because it's so transparent in its principles that not just what makes Starfleet what it is, but when Star Trek like locks in its tried and true storytelling format, that's why an episode like this stands out for me. Because, I mean, we always talk about this, and I'm probably going to take this away from my notes from like here on out into the end of Voyager, but check off production, check off acting, check off music, check off special effects, all this kind of stuff. And then it gets boiled down to where Star Trek, in my opinion, always succeeds and where it needs to be. It's the return of what we call the triumvirate of ethos, pathos, and logos. Right? We have Kirk, Spock, and Bones. We have Picard, Riker, and Deanna. We have Cisco, Kira, and Dax. And now we have Janeway, Chakotay, and Tuvok in a very particular scene for very particular reasons. And it reminds us that Janeway doesn't decide things in a vacuum, right? Because you have the logical Tuvok saying, well, resources are going to be tight. We might want to take this opportunity to look at other options. Chakotay's like, but what about the people? What about the crew that's not going to go along with you? And Janeway was like, but what about our principles? Taking what Chakotay and Tuvok have said and said, how do these filter through the Federation Charter's principles? Because that's ultimately her responsibility, right? And that, to me, that's how Star Trek stands the test of time. The only other thing that I would probably say is a critique, I wanted to see more of Fantome and his race's story because it's so fascinating. And you're right. You mentioned before, like scenes with Tom Balan and Neelix and him trying to prove that he's a better chef. You can take that time and apply it more towards fleshing out Fantome's character and
right.
Kind of like how that process, because it's very, very interesting. So here's an exercise though for the audience, right? I'd love to hear, John and I, we would love to hear your thoughts on how Janeway was able to hold on to her principles to create this alliance with no resources and no allies at the start versus Sisko's concession and what he had to do, the choices he had to make, bringing the Romulans into the Dominion War by recruiting Garrick so that Sisko could keep his hands morally clean from bending Federation principles. That's what Janeway had to decide in the void, devoid of resources, devoid of allies, devoid of the kind of help that she needed. So she had to create the Federation in spirit to do that, right? And not compromise her principles. So I think it's an interesting ethical question, and I'd like to see where the audience lands on that.
I love that. All right. Well, as always, anxious to hear what the audience says. And I'll keep mine short and sweet. Stylistically, I love what they do with the show. I love the ambition in this episode. You have a total change in tone when it comes to the lighting, and you have all these new ships, and you have some return of other ships from species that we've encountered before. I'll get to that in just a second. But you kind of have to rewrite how you film the show and how you block the show when you do something like this and you say, you know what, we're going to turn off all the lights and see what it looks like then. We're not going to have the spectacular beauty shots of ships flying around in starlight and nebulas and all the cool looking things we normally get in space. So I love the daring use of dark in this show. Now, a few weeks ago, we covered Shattered, and we had the conceit of the time fracture that shows up, and we, as an audience, get this kind of walk through Voyager's history. And I was in a bit of a minority of not loving that particular approach, even though I appreciate what you said and what others in our audience said, that this was a way to do this kind of love letter to Voyager by walking through previous episodes. But now we have this episode that introduces us to some new aliens, but it also lets us revisit some that we've encountered in the Delta Quadrant before. And we actually have a similar setup tonight. But I have to say that packaging all of that together here, I like the execution in The Void much better. I think it tells a better story. I think that we get a quality version of revisiting some of these aliens that we've seen before in a way that I didn't appreciate with Shattered. So to me, it struck the right balance of something familiar, some familiar ground, but we're going to do it in a new way, newish way at least, and tell a new kind of story that happens to be an old kind of story, which is what you said, Star Trek doing what it does best. Back to Star Trek 101. This one hits all the right notes for me. And we got some top-notch proselytizing from Janeway here. And look, sign me up for it. I love it. I love how it works as an episode, and I love the messages that we get. And since I said messages, well, let's move on to the morals meetings messages. I'm only going to focus on a couple of areas here because I feel like there's so much that you can get into with this one. But one of the lines that resonated with me, Janeway says, maybe the best way to get help is to give it. Now let's talk about the psychology of that statement and its real world effect by talking about Benjamin Franklin, and specifically the Benjamin Franklin effect. So in 1736, Ben was a clerk in the General Assembly, and he needed the endorsement and support of a political rival. These two guys did not get along. But Franklin had a great idea. He knew that his rival was an avid book collector just like he was. So he asked for a very specific, very rare book out of his rival's collection. And I'm paraphrasing here, of course, for the modern era, said, hey, can I borrow this? It really mean a lot to me. I just want it for a few days. I want to be able to read it, to say that I have read it, and I will give it back to you in exactly the condition that you loaned it to me. And his rival received this request, and he thought about it, and he did it. He actually took the time to do it. And Franklin read it, took it back to him. They had a chat about the book, and they became friends through that exchange, through that mutual love and interest in their book collections. Now, here's the kicker. Franklin already had the book in his own collection. He didn't need it. But he knew that by asking a favor that bonded these two over a shared interest, that he could erase the rivalry. And that is exactly what happened. They became fast friends after that point. And now, the story might be embellished, it might be apocryphal, but I'll quote from the autobiography of Ben Franklin, "He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged." Now, he's not saying you shouldn't do favors for other people, but he's saying that there is a kind of bond that comes with this moment of somebody doing something for someone else. The giver is the one who actually receives in a case like this. So yeah, you can't look at everyone who opposes you as someone to beat into submission. You can actually find common ground and find common interest. You benefit from giving favor, just as the person on the other side benefits. I want to touch on another concept here that I alluded to in the last segment, and that is another thing that we see show up in Star Trek very often, that you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you've got to work together to strengthen every link. If you want to survive, you have to make sure that everyone survives. And not just survives, but has enough to be a positive contributor. Even when those weirdos from the hierarchy show up, you know what? They've got a place. And they have something to contribute. And it might not be that apparent at first. Just look at Fantome and his people. But they do. They do actually have something to contribute. And good leadership recognizes it, that everybody has a place and everybody has room to contribute, just as good leadership should recognize the value in everyone. And what we see here from Janeway, who it should emanate from, is good leadership. Now, I know there's a lot more ground to cover, Norman, so I want to know what else you bring here to the morals, meanings, messages of The Void.
I'm sitting here listening to you in this recording, and I want to stand up and applaud because I'm just like, I love it when Star Trek gets it right, any series, because it inspires me to talk about it more. And I feel, empowered in my belief that Star Trek still, when it does what it does well, that's what separates this particular brand from all of the other science fiction out there. So I have a quote here from Dr. Anthony Fauci. He said, "There's more than one way to get to the goal that you want to get to, but once you compromise your own principles, then you're lost. You're really lost." After watching this episode, I had this eureka moment. We watch it several times, 4 times, and I was like, oh, I get it now. I get it now. That eureka moment, it's kind of like in the title of the episode. We haven't played the title game in a while, but this is kind of like my eureka moment with the title of this episode. It's the analogy that's being told. The void isn't just this anomaly in space that Voyager encountered, like in night. That was another type of dark anomaly. There are all these different types of anomalies in space, but it's not about the void itself. It's the metaphor for the moral bankruptcy that you will suffer if you abandon your principles, ethics, and empathy.
Oh, and now I want to stand up and applaud for you. Oh my God, that's awesome.
That is a void in your soul that you cannot fill once you, as Dr. Fauci said, once you compromise your own principles. Then you're lost and you will never leave the void. Right?
Yeah.
Janeway said in her ready room, I've become convinced that we've got to stick to our principles, not abandon them. Chakotay says, should the crew be ready to die for those principles? And Janeway says, if the alternative means becoming thieves and killers ourselves, yes. But I'm betting that our principles are going to keep us alive. That's the kind of like eureka moment I had with Fantome and his race, right? The principles that she sticks to, the empathy that she gives that race allows them to stay alive because of the sheer nature of being empathetic and good, right? That's it. That's Star Trek. My morals, meanings, and messages here are going to be, I usually go on, but they're going to be kind of light here because this is what we expect from traditional Star Trek. This is at the very heart represents the core competency, the core values of Star Trek, the ability to find solutions that benefit all, to offer inclusion to those who would benefit from a mutual and collaborative relationship, and to keep pushing forward with this course of moral direction no matter the outcome. This answers the question, what is Starfleet?
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Workforce.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Matt Esposito, Tom Kozak, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, and Paul Shadwell. Remember this in the years ahead, even a mini federation is better than no federation at all. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.